By the end of this story, the last thing you will remember won't be monsters or ghosts. You will remember the silence, the exact moment when you decide to stop the car. That split second when the headlights catch someone who should not be there, and how kindness can be the most dangerous decision you will ever make. It happened 3 times, on 3 separate nights, to 3 victims who could only describe the same thing, the image that appeared seconds before everything collapsed. I grew up in a place where darkness was never empty. It watched. The sky felt low, and the only thing between you and nothingness was the white line of the road. There, stopping for someone wasn't a gesture, it was law. If a car was stalled on the shoulder, you stopped. If someone was standing at the edge, you helped, not out of generosity, but because the next one in need could be your mother, your uncle, you. That belief almost killed me. It was Christmas Eve, a postcard sky, but a cutting cold that froze the marrow. I was 18, driving home alone after my shift at the diner. The heater couldn't keep up, my breath fogging the glass faster than I could wipe it clear. The radio died as soon as I crossed the county line. Only static, no voices, no music, just the sound of the road and the lonely glow of the dashboard. It was then that my headlights found him. A figure, motionless, standing right at the edge of the shoulder, half swallowed by the snow in the shadow of the trees, too still. I didn't think twice. I followed the rule, slowed down, pulled over, and watched him approach. In that moment, with the engine rumbling low, the cold seeping in, I realized what he was holding. It wasn't a suitcase. It wasn't a gas can. Something metallic caught the glare of the headlights, curved, heavy, wrong. It was a compound bow, not for sport, not for show. And as the click of metal echoed through the silence of the night, I understood too late. Some rules were made for a world that no longer exists. His face was in shadow when he climbed into my truck. He didn't speak. The cab felt suddenly small and wrong. There was the faint metallic tang of something like old pennies or cold iron. I couldn't tell if it came from him or the air that had followed him in. He sat rigid, hands on his knees. I asked where he was headed, and he didn't answer. I remember how the heat in the truck fell away. My fingers bunched on the steering wheel, and a noise from somewhere behind my sternum sounded like someone tapping a rim with a coin. I should have driven on. I know that now. But back then, the rule was still louder than the unease, so I turned down the logging road where he said he needed to go. It started as a flat squeeze of trees that closed in the headlights, and then narrowed into a ragged tear of gravel. The engine wasn't steady anymore. It hiccuped against the incline, and the truck felt heavy, like moving through jelly. He told me to stop. I did. When I switched off the engine, it was as if something that had been simmering in the truck came fully awake. The man shifted and the white interior light snapped on. For a second, the light was an accusation. The face in that light was pale in a way I can't make sense of, like someone had poured milk over a map and the land underneath had vanished. It was blank. Not angry, not sad. Empty. Wide, unblinking eyes. He moved toward the passenger door the way a shadow moves toward a window, slow and soft but inevitable, hand reaching for the handle. I could see the bow then, curved and ready. He didn't say anything. He had the air of someone who had rehearsed silence. His fingers grazed the edge of the door, and I heard the scrape like fingernails on glass. I did what my body knew how to do when it needed to live. I bolted. I yanked the door and pushed my foot to the floor, and the truck lunged forward. Gravel sprayed and the trees blurred. In the rear view, the man stood on the road like a cutout, small and surreal. Then, between the trunks, I saw a beige minivan tucked into a shelf of trees about 50 yards back from us, its sliding door wide open like a mouth waiting to swallow. It's the sliding door that lodged in my chest and wouldn't leave. Something about an open sliding door, the way it suggests an interior you can't see, the way it promises more than a single threat, made it worse. If there had been only one person with a bow, then the image of that van made everything feel like a scene from a plan I hadn't known I was in.
I left the logging road like I was ripping off a Band-Aid. I drove straight through the gaps in the dark until I hit the highway, and my knuckles went numb from gripping the wheel so tight. I don't remember the radio coming back on. I don't remember the rest of that night's conversation at home or the way the coffee tasted. What I remember is the hollow in my chest where certainty used to be. Later, when I tried to tell someone, the idea of a minivan with an open sliding door made them frown and ask if I had seen a plate number or remembered the face more clearly. I didn't have that. I had a feeling, an arrangement of images that fit together like broken glass. Weeks passed. There were no reports. I checked the local online boards, the hometown pages, the county dispatch logs. Maybe nothing happened that night. Maybe someone else stopped a little farther down the road and gave a ride home to a man who needed help. Maybe the man with the bow had been drunk and dangerous in a way that ended at that clearing. Whatever the truth, the image of the open door kept playing like a burned celluloid strip in my head. Bare metal track, dark interior, the suggestion of movement inside it. It severed something in me. After that, I never stopped for strangers at night again. I started to look away when people waved at the side of the road. If someone was standing under a street lamp with a thumb out, I took the lane that let me speed past.
I hated myself a little every time. I could almost hear the voice that used to tell me to help, settling like dust in a corner where it wouldn't bother me. And yet some nights I still test my rules in private. If I see a lone silhouette in the distance now, I imagine pulling over. Imagine the cold and that pale face. Imagine the sliding door. I imagine the minivan's interior like a black mouth. I don't know whether I chose safety or cowardice that night. I only know that I carry the choice with me whenever the radio goes quiet and the world narrows to a headlight and a figure on the shoulder. If stories like this hold you, if you want to hear the rest, do us a favor and hit like. I promise there are 2 more nights you won't forget. The next night I'd tell you about wasn't out in the mountains. It was the sticky kind of summer night that keeps its heat like a living thing, the kind where the asphalt radiates and glass smells faintly of fried sugar from the diner. My sister was learning to drive. She had the learner's permit, and the way she gripped the wheel made me watch her hands instead of the road. We were inching out of a gas station on a corner where visibility was a joke. An old pump island, a busted stoplight, a row of hedges that hid the sightline to the left. The night air smelled of gasoline and mothballs, and the station's fluorescent lights hummed like a trapped insect. We'd been parked a moment, waiting to turn, when she looked at me with that nervous smile new drivers have, and said, "Is it clear?" I craned my neck, checked my mirrors. That's when I saw her. A woman huddled at the edge of the pump island, thumb half out, shoulders hunched against a night that was thick and breathing. She had on a thin jacket that wasn't right for the humidity, and when she opened her mouth to speak, it sounded like someone had dragged leaves across gravel, raspy and pleading. "Please," she said, "please, can you take me? I need to get to my sister. I'm not safe here." Her voice knifed under my ribs, and for a second, the rule that had shaped my other life creaked back into place. We were 2 kids in a car, and she looked older than us. She looked like someone who had been crying and trying not to make a sound. My sister's hands tightened. I could feel the car vibrate with a nervous energy that belonged to both of us. Everything in me wanted to help. I remember the rehearsed safety lines I told myself. You can take her to the gas station office. You can give her water. You can call someone from a well-lit place. But none of that came easy in the moment. There was the hedge hiding the left turn, the dark beyond the pumps where an older highwayman's eyes could wait, the fact that it was my sister behind the wheel, and I was the one who had to decide. And then there was the woman's voice. It was so thin and urgent that it made me feel foolish for being cautious. We left.
I told myself we would come back after we'd looped the block, that it wasn't forever. The turn we made felt like sealing a pact with my own self-preservation. The corners blurred, the engine hummed, the neon sign of the station fell behind us. When we pulled into the driveway at home, the woman was the last thing on my mind, because we had pizza to finish, and a television show to catch, and the small duties of that weekend life. Days later, a missing person flyer was taped to the bulletin board at the grocery store. The face on the paper took up half the sheet. Same thin jacket, same hollowed eyes from what I could tell, although photographs flattened nuance and emotion. The flyer said she'd been seen last at a gas station. My stomach dropped out of me. It felt physically heavy, like I'd swallowed something that hung there and pressed on my lungs. I told myself maybe it wasn't the same woman. Missing posters get tossed up for many reasons: arguments, trips out of the county, people who come back after a while and explain the misunderstanding. For weeks I kept telling myself that. I told myself it until my voice went hoarse. And then one afternoon, when the hum of the grocery store made everything seem continuous and safe, a woman I worked with, someone who knew people at the county office, said they found her. She didn't say how, just the compressed syllables of a sentence that had been reheated a dozen times and never got easier. My hands went cold. Months later, the coroner's report, which I only read in a summary online, included a line about evidence that suggested the victim had been kept alive for weeks. That detail anesthetized me, in a way facts rarely do. To imagine someone alive and afraid, not in one terrible instant of time, something about that lodged in my throat and refused to let go. I started replaying the gas station over and over. I would see the woman's mouth move, that rasp like gravel across a boardwalk. I would think about proximity, how close we had been to affecting that night in some unknown way. I would imagine the ways we might have helped, and the ways that help could have changed things for her, and for us. Guilt tightened around me in small, efficient ways. I found myself stepping into strangers' paths in later months, buying extra groceries for the homeless man by the bus stop. I became the person who would give blankets, who would offer to call a cab. I couldn't sleep past the image of her voice, the way it had asked for help, and how in that brief rotating of possibility, I had chosen my own safety. But even as my behavior changed outwardly, inwardly there was a fracture I couldn't fix. Helping became an obsession and a defense mechanism. It was easier to throw money at a problem than to take responsibility for a face I might have pushed away. The memory didn't arrive as one clean photograph. It came as a smear of heat and static, and a woman's voice that never quite finished what she was asking for.
I felt the moral calculus inside me stretch taut, compassion on one side, survival on the other. The balance flattened into indecision, and at night it replayed in my head. Should we have waited? Should we have pulled around? Should we have risked being wrong? That's where the story lingers now for me, not fully answered. There are some things I can't know. There are patrol reports that I don't have clearance to read. There are photos I will never see. All I have is the memory of a woman with a voice like paper, and the way my sister looked at me when we drove away, equal parts relief and fear. There's no noble ending in that memory, no sense of closure, only the question. I still check my rear view whenever I'm out after dark. I still get up in the middle of the night and look at the window, imagining the sick yellow glow of a gas station lamp. Sometimes I convince myself that the way I changed and started to help more is redemption of some kind. Sometimes I think that it's just another way to keep the guilt sharpened and awake. I should say here that I don't know what would have happened if we'd stopped. I don't know whether we'd have saved the woman or put ourselves in danger. I only know what I chose and what hasn't stopped choosing me back. The summer heat eventually gave way to a colder year. I moved across town for a job, and with the new address, I told myself I could bury the memory in other streets. But it wasn't so simple. The mind has a map you can't cross out. Names, textures, and the smell of gasoline stayed etched like a fingerprint. A few months after the gas station, winter came back. Snow started to fall earlier than usual, and the highway closures were now part of our weather vocabulary. The third account I'm going to tell you about is the one that you'll hear people refer to as the thing that makes them avoid a road forever. It's the one that happens when the highway shuts down, when families are funneled into back roads that cut through woodlands and along bends nobody would choose unless they had to. That night, Miller's Bend was one of those forced detours. The main artery had iced over, and everyone in our town was being funneled onto side roads that were barely plowed. My husband Mark had been driving. He was tired, the kind of tired that sits under your eyes like a permanent ring. Our 3-year-old Danny was asleep in the back seat, bundled into a car seat and muffled like a small, content package. I'd been watching the dark through the windshield, trying to find a rhythm in the blur of white trees and the smear of our headlights cutting through. The road at Miller's Bend is a place where trees press close to the asphalt, where moonlight bounces off snow and throws odd shadows that can trick your eyes. People in town used to tell stories at the diner about silly accidents there, deer that came out of nowhere, a black ice patch that would catch the best drivers off guard.
There was a rhythm to it, and that night we were moving in the rhythm of people trying to get home. Slow, careful, heavy with the concentration of a small procession of headlights. Halfway through the bend, suddenly something streaked across our path. A small figure, a child, materialized in the headlights like a quick white blot. For a second, we all held our breath because it felt like time paused and every sound dropped out. The child was wearing a bright pink jacket that made her look, absurdly, like a bright candy against the snow. She ran toward us, a pocket of motion in the stillness, and she had something in her hand, a piece of rock or ice, jagged and glinting. She started to scream, not a word for anyone in the car, more of a raw, blunt thing that cut the sleep out of us. The sound hit my head like someone striking it with an open palm. Mark swerved, and for a moment the lateral motion of the car, but controlled, careful, was like a paintbrush across the night. I glanced in the rear view. There, half concealed by the curve and the snowbanks, was a dark van paused like an animal, low to the ground, its silhouette partially hidden where the road curved. I remember the way the van's color bled into the night and then became obvious as the headlights swept past, an uninterrupted black rectangle with a hint of a window where someone had rolled up the glass. In the mirror, someone inside the van seemed to move. The window rolled up slow, like a trap pulling shut. The van didn't drive off. It didn't leap forward into action. It simply sat and watched, and that watching was worse than anything else. For a blink, I thought that maybe a parent or neighbor had been outside, and the child had been trying to get our attention, a cry for help and misdirected. But then I saw, as our headlights cleared the bend, a smear on our rear bumper. The car had a new scratch and a smear of something dark that looked like the shadow left by a wet glove. We drove on because what else could we do? The child had run out and the van had been there. The minutes stretched and then uncoiled into motion. Mark swerved softly, hands white on the wheel. Danny stirred and muttered in sleep. At home that night, we huddled under blankets and tried to convince ourselves of practicalities. Maybe it was a kid playing. Maybe she'd slipped and fell and someone had taken her home. But the image of that pink jacket and the way the child's face had seemed almost too small and too contorted for such a loud sound kept returning. In the morning, there was a faint line on the bumper and a half-frozen scrap of white fuzz that I thought might be from the jacket, or maybe just snow that had stuck to the paint. I took a picture, more out of compulsion than intention, then sent it to Mark's brother who worked at the tow shop, asking if it could be anything. He replied with a shrug emoji and told me not to worry. The townsfolk talk about Miller's Bend like it's a place that raises its head out of the night sometimes. Sometimes they tell you it's nothing. Sometimes they tell stories so old they don't even remember how they start. But that image, pink jacket, dark van, doesn't care how stories get told. It remained. At night, I replay the sequence, headlights cut through the trees, a child's white gloves flinging, the rock raising and falling, our car passing and missing the contact. I imagine other possibilities. What if we'd stopped? What if Mark had slammed on the brakes? Would the door have flown open? Would the van have swallowed us? Those are the ghost questions that have no purchase in daylight. I didn't mean to leave the third story dangling like this, but there are some nights whose consequences are not tidy things you can tie off with a period. They spill. They curve into other people's lives in ways you never expected. Some of what happens at Miller's Bend is in police logs I will never see. Some of it is conjecture that lives in diner booths. What I can tell you is the way the image burrowed into me, the way every time I pass a curve in the dark, my eyes search for a bit of pink. You can probably feel the weight building as I tell these. You can hear the way a single choice compresses an evening into a lifetime of replay. The 3 nights I've started to show you so far all share this. A small, ordinary decision, a quick image, and a life that rearranges itself around the memory. The rest of what happened, the things people found or didn't, the official lines and the private silences, I'll get to. But for now, let me leave you with one last image from the first night that keeps coming back to me. When I close my eyes, the thing that plays is not the man or the bow. It's the beige minivan and that open sliding door. It sits under the trees like a promise or a question. And every time I picture it, I feel the cold again, a metallic tang under my tongue, the pressure in my chest like a fist. That open door is how those nights haunt. It is how decisions turn into shadows that follow you long after the road goes quiet.
When I close my eyes, the thing that plays is not the man or the bow. It's the beige minivan and that open sliding door. It sits under the trees like a question you can't answer. And every time I picture it, my chest tightens the same way it did back then. Metallic tang under the tongue, the sudden need to swallow down something bigger than fear. Days after the incident, I drove by the logging road in daylight, because daylight feels like an eraser. I told myself I was being brave. The truth is, I wanted proof. The turnoff looked smaller in the morning, a shallow mouth in the hillside overgrown with winter bracken. Tire ruts that had been fresh the night I fled had hardened and mixed with leaf litter. Someone had left a cigarette butt on the shoulder. There was no beige minivan sitting there now.
There were no signs, no footprints that pointed to a continued plan. Just the way the earth settled around the wheel ruts, quiet and ordinary in daylight, implacable in its normalcy. I told Jenkins about the van. She sat across from me in that kitchen light and listened without interrupting. I could see her trying on different expressions, protective, furious, disbelieving, like she was checking to find one that fit. "You called the sheriff?" she asked finally. I had not. Part of me thought a call would lead to lead harassment, an officer asking for a plate number I couldn't give, a shrug and a note in a log. Part of me thought that once I said the words out loud, I would have to accept a role in a story that might end with police tape and interviews. Admitting the fear out loud made the memory more real, and real things have consequences. So I delayed. I checked the county message board and scanned threads where people posted about suspicious vans and men with bows, like they were cataloging a nightmare. I sent one anonymous tip off a burner email I had, and then convinced myself that I hadn't done anything to make anyone care. Weeks became months, and the memory of that night did not fade. It repositioned itself. At first it was a flash, leaky and bright, and then it settled into the parts of me that make decisions. When friends said, "You should have called," I told them the reasons why I hadn't, like rehearsed excuses. When a neighbor told me a rumor about a man who liked to hunt deer along that ridgeline, I clung to it because it implied random danger rather than something elaborately planned. We like randomness because randomness is easier to stomach. Organized danger implies a calculus we might have unwittingly stepped into. Every time I drove past the gap after that, headlights slicing the trees, the image of the van would appear at the edge of my vision. Sometimes it was a flash of beige between birches. Sometimes it was the suggestion of a sliding door creak. Once, at a gas station 3 towns over, a minivan pulled in and left its sliding door halfway open while someone grabbed a bag of chips. For 1 second I froze, and then my breath was loud, and I had to keep myself from running back to the car and driving away. I didn't want to be the hysterical neighbor telling stories about vans. I wanted to be the person who had simply made a judgment call and moved on. But the memory kept returning like a scratched record. I haven't made peace with that night. The choice I made, stop, pick him up, follow where he asked me to go, hovers between altruism and error, and I am still trying to figure out which it was. I sometimes imagine alternate versions of myself who didn't turn down the logging road, who kept going and didn't stop until the radio came back on and the world felt sane. Imagined alternatives can be cruel because they present neat endings that never happened. Real life is messy. Real life leaves images on repeat.
The second story I told you, the gas station one, drove a wedge the other way. There, choosing safety over risk left a residue of guilt that changed me outwardly into someone more helpful and inwardly into someone perpetually apologetic. The two feelings don't cancel each other out. They only make a person more complicated. Cautious, but quick to give blankets. Reluctant, yet incapable of shrugging off a plea. We try to make stories make sense by attaching outcomes to them, but these 3 nights resisted tidy endings. That doesn't mean there aren't consequences. Patterns develop. After the gas station, I started carrying a small kit in the trunk. A blanket, bottled water, a phone charger, cash in an envelope. It made me feel useful and less like someone who turned away. If a stranger approached me now on a busy afternoon, I would be the one to step toward them without thinking. But at night, I would speed past. The rules split according to light. I've wondered what made me more afraid of the dark after these nights. Was it the physical threat, men with bows and vans with open doors, or the way darkness compresses possibilities until they're terrifying? In daylight, a person is a person. At night, a person is a silhouette with a motive. The world reduces to pattern recognition and whether your gut gets it right. When your gut has been wrong, or close to wrong, it learns to overcorrect. Miller's Bend, the third night, felt like the most direct of those corrections. It wasn't about a stranger's silent purpose or a woman's rasp. It was an intersection between a child's face and a waiting vehicle, the two images that, when conjoined by a night and a curve, made my imagination do the work police reports should be allowed to do. The morning after Miller's Bend, I couldn't stop looking at the scratch on the bumper in the smear of dark fuzz that might have been snow or cloth. The photo I took, shaky, a close-up of gray paint and a thin white line, became something I sent to anyone who would look. Mark's brother at the tow shop shrugged online and suggested we'd rub something on the road. The shrug calmed me and infuriated me in equal measure. People in town told variations of the story in the diner with a lowered voice. Kids around there do stupid things, they'd say. Probably a prank. Their definitive tone was an attempt to make the world manageable again. I phoned the non-emergency line. I left a message. I asked for a callback because a child had been in my headlights and there was a van sitting on the curve. The woman's voice at the dispatch office that returned my call was polite and procedural. She asked questions I couldn't answer, a precise time, a description of the van, whether we had stopped. I admitted we had not. The operator said she would note the report and send a patrol when one was available. A patrol car did drive that road more often for a few nights. I watched their lights sweep the bend, as if that would wash the image clean.
It didn't. Nothing fixed the image except time, and time did not work fast. After Miller's Bend, I found that I had a new set of rules for parenting that were less about common sense and more about contingency. I would not let Danny sit in a rear-facing seat for longer than necessary. I adjusted our pickup times. I made Mark nap less in the passenger seat and keep his eyes more on the road. Parenting after a near miss changes the narrative of who you are. You become the guardian of an imagined future that you will do anything to protect. That future can calcify into paranoia quickly, so you have to keep checking its edges or you risk being trapped inside it. People in town offered explanations. One neighbor said it might have been a man baiting cars to rob them. Another suggested it could have been a prank by kids. I didn't know which was worse, a criminal plan or a mean-spirited joke that could have ended so differently. Jokes are cruelty in a sweatshirt. I wanted someone to name what I'd seen, to put it into a box with a label that made sense. Accident, prank, crime. Instead, I had a smear on my bumper, a child's scream that hadn't been clear enough to form words, and a van that watched as if it had been waiting for a moment to become someone else's story. Weeks bled into years. Mark and I stopped taking that route at night. We found other ways to get home, detours that added minutes but felt like insurance. Other people might think this was small, an extra 5 minutes for peace of mind, but avoidance is one of the ways we try to control an unpredictable world. It is also a way of admitting we've been hurt by something that didn't have to happen to us. The longer the avoidance lasts, the more it cements the idea that some places carry danger, not because they're inherently bad, but because our memory has chosen them as a place to store fear. One winter, a few years later, I was on a different back road, and a child in a bright jacket darted into my headlights. My hand tightened on the wheel the way it had at Miller's Bend, and I realized I reacted to the image before the situation had a chance to be real. The reflex wasn't rational. It was wood grain and headlight, and a child's outline. I drove on, heart pounding, and I understood then that the 3 nights had rearranged the wiring in my body. Seemingly unrelated sights now triggered the same cautionary script: bright jacket, sliding door, raspy voice. My life had been edited by a sequence of small incidents that I never expected would write themselves into my nervous system. People ask if I ever saw the man from the first night again, if I ever learned what happened to the woman from the gas station, if anyone ever reported the van for Miller's Bend. The honest answer is no. I have fragments. I have rumors and second-hand notes. I checked public records when I could and found nothing that tied the incidents together.
I found no case files, no arrest logs, not even a community meeting where anyone said, "We have to talk about this." That absence is part of the haunting. The lack of resolution wounds differently than a bad ending. Closure would have allowed me to set the stories down. Lack of closure makes them live in my head in high definition. I've tried to situate the moments within the larger moral landscape that used to guide me. Stop to help, keep yourself safe, be compassionate. Those precepts are not contradictory. Ideally, they balance each other. But in practice, when the night narrows your choice and there is no time for deliberation, what do? People will tell you what you should have done. They will not have been the ones with a bow in the passenger seat, or a sister learning to drive with wet palms. They will not have felt the rasp of someone's voice in the dark. It's easy to make moral pronouncements from the comfortable position of hindsight. The people who were with me on those nights didn't write the rule book. They wrote a response in an instant and had to live with it for years. Living with that has been a practice in humility. I have learned that certainty rarely comes without cost. I have learned that guilt can be a companion that wants to rearrange your identity. It will tell you you are cruel for being cautious and reckless for being kind. I have learned to let action be a place to test whether remorse can convert into something useful. For me, that meant channeling the guilt from the gas station into concrete acts, volunteering at the shelter, leaving blankets by the bus stop, answering a stranger's question about the time when I can. It wasn't penance so much as an attempt at balance. But balance is not an eraser. The beige minivan door, the raspy plea, the child's pink jacket, they are images that return in fragments. They appear in dreams, in sideways glances while walking home alone, in the way I check the back seat before backing out of a driveway. They appear even when I'm not thinking about them. Sometimes I wake up convinced I heard the metallic scrape of fingernails. Other times I will be on a highway and a van will pass in the opposite direction, and my breath will shallow, and I will grip the wheel like I've done 1,000 times. The memory isn't linear, it is associative. Something small will flip the switch, and the past will pour through. People have asked me whether these nights changed me for better or worse. That's a fair question, but it misses the texture of what happened. I am both more cautious and more giving. I have fewer illusions about the world being inherently kind, and more compulsion to try to make it kinder when I can, without endangering myself. The line I walk is narrower than it once was. I do not lean so far toward trust that I forget fear. Neither do I become the kind of person who won't ever reach out when the moment might matter. That tension is where I live now.
There's a practical side to these memories, too. They have led me to teach my child a few odd rituals. Check the back seat, look both ways at every driveway, park under a light when possible. Some of it is useful. Some of it is the echo of fear. When friends tease me about being overly cautious, I can sometimes laugh with them. Mostly, I don't tell them the specifics, because it's easier to live with the image inside your own head than to unload it onto someone else and watch them try to fix it for you. Sometimes, late at night, Mark and I talk about those moments. We replay choices with the careful distance of people trying to make sense of their younger selves. He has his own memories, the way the child screamed in headlights, the smell of snow on our coats afterward, the desperate flinch when a van idles too close at a light. He says things like, "We were lucky," and I always answer, "Was it luck, or was it something else?" He shrugs in that way that means both of us are tired of the speculation. The safest conclusion we can agree on is that the night compresses decisions, and sometimes those compressed decisions have outsized consequences. That is the scariest part, how small moments can redirect ordinary lives. If there is a way these stories are connected beyond the themes and images, it is in the narrowing of choices that darkness creates. In each case, the night simplified the decision tree into 2 stark options: stop or go, help or withhold, swerve or stay the course. Humans are not binary machines, but when you have seconds to act, you end up performing in black and white. These 3 nights taught me that the night doesn't invent danger, it amplifies the moral compression that makes decisions feel like life or death. And yet, despite all of that, I don't want the takeaway to be that you should never stop, never help, never trust. Stories like this have become shorthand for warning signs, and they should warn, but they should also remind us of the cost of living in fear alone. We need each other, even if that need is negotiated by caution. The tension between compassion and self-preservation is the human condition. The haunting images are a byproduct of being alive and imperfect. The nights will keep coming for everyone. People will stand on shoulders, a minivan will idle with a sliding door open somewhere, a voice will rasp out a plea. The world will keep compressing choices down to immediate decisions. We will probably keep getting some of them right and some of them wrong. We will probably keep living long enough to stew in the aftermath. I can't tell you whether the man with the bow was part of an organized operation or a singular terrifying person. I can't tell you whether the woman at the gas station could have been saved if we'd made a different choice. I can't tell you what would have happened if Mark had braked at Miller's Bend. Those are the things that get me up at night, the not knowing.
The unknowns feed the images until they feel like facts. What I can tell you is this: the images themselves are the inheritance of those nights. They don't teach lessons so much as they lodge inside you and shape how you move through the world. They become the quiet editors of behavior. They curve your route home, the stories you tell babysitters, the way you carry your keys between your fingers in the dark. If one thing holds me together now, it's an awareness that fear shouldn't be squandered on itself. I try to let the unease sharpen my empathy rather than calcify into a permanent withdrawal. I try to balance caution with action in small, practical ways that cause the least harm. It isn't heroic, it's messy and human. It's the only philosophy that seems to survive the tension. Before I go, I want you to imagine the 3 images once more. The beige minivan with its sliding door open under trees like prison bars, a thin, raspy voice asking for a ride at a cracked gas station light, a tiny child in a pink jacket lunging into headlights at Miller's Bend. Keep them in your mind for a second and notice what you do with them. Do you feel the impulse to help? The rush of doubt? The flick of guilt? That reaction is part of the point. Those images haunt because they ask us a question. What would you have done in that tiny instant? Which of these nights would haunt you the most? Tell me in the comments. I'd really like to know. And if you want more real nighttime encounters told in the kind of first-person way that leaves a mark, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.